The snow clawed at her like teeth. Naicha Yazi stumbled down the back steps of the Briggs farmhouse, bare feet sinking into crusted white. Her breath came in sharp, tearing gasps, each one swallowed by the howl of the high desert wind. The cold bit straight through the cotton of her thin dress, slicing into skin muscle bone. Her belly heavy with her unborn daughter pitched forward as another contraction slammed into her like a train, sending her to her knees. Behind her, the door slammed shut with finality. A lock clicked. "You should have known better than to cross my mama," Seth Briggs said through the door, his voice thick with venom and victory. "We don't share blood with trash, and we sure as hell don't raise it." She clawed her way back up the steps, sobbing, pounding with both fists. "You have my boy Talon, he's just 4. Let me have him. I'll sign whatever you want, just give me my son." But the windows went dark. They'd blown out the lamps like she was already dead. Inside, she could hear him crying. "Mama, Mama, I want Mama!" Talon's voice shrieked through the wood. Naiche pressed her head to the grain heart-shattering skin burning from wind. Velma Briggs's voice floated back sharp, flinty cold as the sky above. "Stop that noise. She's gone. You don't cry over people who choose to leave you." Another contraction buckled Naiche's legs. She bit the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted copper. She didn't have time to give birth. She didn't have time to be cold. She didn't have time to die. She had to get her son. She staggered down the steps again, panting, knees raw from the frozen porch. The snow hit sideways now, stinging her eyes, pulling at her braids like the wind had fingers. Her vision blurred. Her fingers were numb red, turning to white. They had taken her shoes. They had taken her coat. They had taken everything except the baby still inside her, and the child still screaming her name behind that door. The moon was buried behind the clouds, but the outline of the road shimmered faintly ahead. Somewhere miles off, the dirt lane would turn toward the canyon, then the foothills, and eventually curve back toward Silver Creek or the Navajo Wash. She had neighbors, maybe, but not close ones. Not anyone who would hear her over the storm. The snow swirled around her like smoke, erasing tracks as fast as she made them. The desert had vanished. The red clay, the pinon, the dry riverbeds gone under a world of white silence and wind. Naiche tried to walk. She made it 6 steps before another pain hit and she dropped like a felled tree. She screamed, but the storm swallowed it whole. The baby kicked hard, shifting low. It was coming. Too soon. Too far from help. She dug her hands into the snow, dragging herself forward. Her breath left in wheezing sobs. "I'm not dying out here," she whispered. "You hear me, Creator? I am not dying out here." She thought of Talon's face, the way he curled into her side when he was sleepy, the way he asked questions about stars, the soft hiccup he made when he tried not to cry. She saw his wide, dark eyes staring through the door's window, screaming for her reaching. She couldn't die. Not when he still believed she was coming back. A dark shape loomed ahead at first, just shadow in the snow. A tree, a massive juniper with branches, bowed low arms outstretched like shelter. She threw herself toward it, crawling now, every limb screaming. By the time she reached the base, her hands were purple and stiff. The bark bit her back as she curled into the trunk. She couldn't go any farther. The wind roared around her like wolves. It tore through the desert like it had been waiting to claim her. She pressed her hands to her stomach. Atsa. That would be her name. Eagle. "You don't have to be strong," she whispered to her unborn daughter. "I'll be strong for both of us. Just hold on a little longer," she screamed again as another wave hit. The pain this time didn't pass. It clenched and stayed twisting like fire in her bones. She reached up weakly, her fingers digging into the bark. I'm sorry, she choked. I tried. Creator, I tried. The cold didn't hurt anymore. That was the part that scared her. It felt warm now, drowsy. Her vision dimmed. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew what that meant. She remembered what her grandmother had told her long ago: when the cold stops hurting, you're almost gone. She closed her eyes. Talon's face swam behind her lids. I'm coming back for you, baby, she whispered. I promise. I swear on the life of everything I've got left. She screamed one last time, not out of pain, out of sheer will. She screamed not to survive, but to be found. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats, the crunch of snow under something heavy. A man's voice cut through the white, low and rough, half-muttered to a horse. Then a sudden stop, the sound of someone dismounting, boots thudding into snow, footsteps running. Hey, ma'am, can you hear me? She forced her eyes open. A man knelt beside her, dark coat, red scarf face drawn with windburn. Patchy eyes and something else in his face, grief maybe. Recognition. You're bleeding, he said. You're pregnant. You're in labor. She tried to nod. Her lips cracked as she said, They took my son. They took him. Don't speak. You're freezing. I'm getting you out of here. Strong arms lifted her up like she weighed nothing. She didn't know where she was going, only that for the first time in hours she wasn't alone. His voice, solid and warm against the blizzard, rumbled next to her ear. My name's Eli Redhorse. I'm going to get you somewhere safe. She drifted in and out. Her body was shutting down, but her mind clung to one thing she had screamed. And someone had heard her. You keep breathing, I'll do the rest. Eli said, gripping the reins with one hand and holding her against his chest with the other. The snow hadn't let up. It came sideways in waves, blinding, biting, grinding the canyon trail into something shapeless. Eli Redhorse bent low over the saddle horn, shielding Nycha with his own coat, her body limp in his arms, soaked through and pale as bone. Her head lolled against him, face bloodless, lips cracked, murmuring words he could barely hear. They took him. My son. Talon. They took him. The name hit something deep in Eli, but he pressed it down. Now wasn't the time. He leaned closer, steadying her in the saddle. Don't fall asleep. You hear me? I've got you. Just keep breathing. The mare Gila picked her steps carefully along the trail that ran the back edge of Eli's grazing land, skirting the edge of the wash. His cabin was still a mile out, tucked into a bluff, where the rocks jutted like broken teeth. No one came out this way except ranchers or the desperate. Eli wasn't sure which one he was anymore. He glanced down at her again. The woman's belly rose and fell with shallow effort. Her dress was barely more than a torn shift. No coat. No boots. Just bare skin rubbed raw by wind and pain. Who throws a woman out in labor? He muttered. What kind of people? He didn't finish, because he knew the answer. He'd seen it too many times. People who prized reputation over blood. People who never meant forever when they said family. The mare stumbled slightly in the drift. Eli swore under his breath, adjusted his weight, and pressed her tighter to his chest. Almost there, he said more to himself than to her. Just hang on. The lantern on the porch burned low but steady, swaying in the storm. He'd left it lit in case he didn't make it back from checking the southern fence line. Thank God he had. If he'd gone the other way, if he'd turned back 5 minutes sooner, if she'd screamed 5 minutes later. He didn't let the thought finish. When they reached the porch, he swung off boots, sinking deep in the drift. With practiced ease, he pulled her into his arms again, kicked the door open, and brought her inside. Warmth slapped them both like a second heartbeat. The wood stove crackled strong scent of cedar heavy in the air. Eli crossed the floor in 3 strides and laid her gently on the cot closest to the stove. He stripped off his coat and wrapped it around her. Her body trembled like something near death. "Easy," he said, kneeling beside her. "You're safe. You're in my home now." Her eyes fluttered open for a second. He saw fire there, dim but not gone. "Eli Redhorse," she murmured. He stilled. "Do you know me?" She gave the barest nod. "Saw you feed the old man behind the chapel last winter." He exhaled slow. "Then you know I'm not letting you die." He moved quickly. Water boiling, blankets warmed, towels clean, rags, a bottle of rye whiskey, and a cedar bowl brought from the shelf. He'd seen births before, helped 2 wild mares and a neighbor's wife when the snow kept the midwife out. But this felt different. Human, fragile, sacred. Like everything in the room might split if he breathed too loud. She moaned, clutching her belly. "You said your name was Nietzsche." She nodded weakly, jaw clenched as another wave hit. "I need you to listen to me, Nietzsche. The baby's coming. I don't know how long you were in the snow, but we need to move fast now. Can you lie back?" She nodded, tears leaking from her eyes. He saw it then, not just pain, but terror. "This baby's not just a baby to you," he said softly. "This baby is your reason." She didn't answer with words, just a look that would have burned a hole in the world if it could. Eli dipped the cloth in warm water, brushing it across her forehead. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "Not anymore." He worked through the next hour without pause, encouraging, guiding, catching the baby girl as she came into the world with a scream that sliced the storm clean in half. Nietzsche sobbed, reaching out blindly. "She's okay," Eli said, wrapping the child in a soft flannel he'd once set aside for his own dreams that never came. "She's perfect." He laid the baby on her chest. Nietzsche held her close, whispering something in Diné that Eli didn't catch, but understood. Then she looked up at him. "She's Atsa." Eli nodded. "Strong name. She'll need it," Nietzsche whispered. He helped her drink water, tucked the blankets around them both, and stoked the fire higher. Only then did he step outside the cabin for a moment, letting the snow sting his face. He didn't cry, not out loud. But the ache in his chest was back again, old and familiar. The sight of her shivering under that tree had ripped open something he thought long buried. Because once long ago he'd ridden hard for a different woman who died before he could reach her. This time he had made it in time. This time someone lived. When he stepped back inside, she was asleep, the baby cooing softly beside her. Eli pulled a chair close, sat with a rifle across his knees, and kept watch. Something in the air had shifted. He could feel it, like the story wasn't over, not even close. "You didn't just save her life," Reverend Amos said quietly. "You interrupted whatever darkness was trying to take her soul." By morning, the storm had spent itself. A silver stillness blanketed the canyon, the kind that muffled sound and made the world feel held in pause. Snow curled along the cabin's windowsills, and smoke from the chimney rose straight up like a signal flare against the pale blue dawn. Inside, Eli stirred a pot of blue cornmeal mush on the stove, while Nietzsche slept with her baby tucked against her chest. The soft sounds of breathing and crackling fire filled the room like a hymn. Atsa's tiny fingers clutched at her mother's collar, face nestled in the crook of Nietzsche's arm, peace written in the small lines of her brow. Eli glanced over his shoulder more times than necessary. He didn't know much about babies, but something about the way that little girl had cried last night, the way her voice rang strong, stuck in his ribs like a memory. He poured hot mush into a bowl, added honey, and set it on the side table near the cot. Nietzsche stirred, blinking slowly as the warmth of the fire met her cheeks. "You didn't leave?" she whispered. "Didn't plan to," Eli said, easing into the chair beside her. "Figured you'd need strength today. And food." She tried to sit up. Pain flickered across her face, but she steadied herself. He helped her without a word. "Where am I?" she asked, voice cracking. "My cabin. East Bluff, just past Bear Creek. I found you under that juniper last night." Nietzsche looked around slowly. The handmade shelves, the rows of canned tomatoes, the wooden cradle tucked in the corner that hadn't seen use in years. Her eyes rested on him. "You live alone, I do." She hesitated. "Why did you help me?" Eli didn't answer at first. Then softly he said, "Because I heard someone scream, and I've ignored too many cries in my life." She looked down at Atsa. "You shouldn't have gotten involved. Too late." There was no anger in her voice, just tiredness, a grief so old it had worn smooth. "I'm going to the chapel later," he said after a moment. "Reverend Amos keeps some herbs and salves for women things he gathers with his wife. Might help you heal faster." Nietzsche blinked back tears she hadn't planned to cry. "I don't have money to pay you, or anyone. I didn't ask for payment." She held his gaze. "That's what frightens me." Eli rose and fetched his coat. "Rest. I'll be back before the sun's overhead." Keela was already saddled by the time he stepped outside, her breath misting in the cold. He rode fast across the crusted drifts cutting through the canyon until the chapel's stone tower came into view, perched on the rise like a weathered sentinel. The front door creaked open before he even dismounted. Reverend Amos, tall and wiry with graying braids tied back beneath his wide-brimmed hat, stepped out with a wool coat pulled tight. "Didn't expect to see you till Sunday," Amos said. "Had a reason." Eli led Keela into the lean-to beside the chapel, then turned. "I found a woman last night, near froze to death, in labor." Amos stilled. "And the child girl. Healthy, strong lungs. But the mother Nietzsche, she's in bad shape. She needs healing herbs, warmth, safety." The Reverend's face didn't change, but Eli saw the shadows pass through his eyes. She native Eli nodded once. "Name Nietzsche, yes." Amos exhaled slowly. "I know her." Eli's jaw tightened. "She said someone took her son." Amos looked down at the snow-covered steps, then back up. "She came here months ago with a child, maybe 2. Quiet, never spoke much. Worked at the trading post for pennies. Then one day, she was gone. She said they took him, likely her in-laws. After her husband died, they saw her as a burden. Some folks up in Elkhorn are kin, the kind that smiles in church and locks their doors behind them." Eli's hands curled into fists. "Tell me where." "No." Amos's voice was gentle but firm. "You ride into that storm of a family without a plan, you won't find justice. Just more broken pieces." Eli swallowed the fire in his chest. "Then what do I do?" Amos gestured for him to follow inside. The chapel was dim lit by stained glass filtered in soft light. Behind the altar, a small wooden room held jars of dried herbs, poultices, and salves. Amos began pulling things from the shelves. "She needs rest, comfort, something to rebuild the blood. I'll send Cora to help. She's been through births, knows what a woman needs after." Eli took the bundle carefully. "Thank you." As he turned to leave, Amos rested a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't just save her life," he said. "You interrupted whatever darkness was trying to take her soul." Outside, the wind had died to a whisper. Eli rode home slow, thinking about that. Darkness, and a soul worth saving. When he returned, Cora was already there, her mare tied to the porch. A retired midwife with sharp eyes and a mouth that didn't waste words. She nodded to Eli, took the herbs from his hands, and vanished inside. Eli waited on the porch, listening through the wall. He heard Nietzsche cry once, then silence. Then the sound of soft voices and the creak of old floorboards. He sat on the porch rail, rifle across his knees again, watching the line of the canyon where snow met sky. After a long while, the door creaked open and Cora stepped out. "She's healing," she said. "But that wound in her spirit's deeper than anything I can patch." Eli nodded. Cora studied him. "You planning to keep them under your roof?" "I wasn't planning anything," he said. "But they're here, so I reckon that means something." Cora's eyes softened. "Then you'd best get ready. You're not just protecting two bodies now. You're standing between them and whatever put her in that snow." As she mounted her horse, she added, "And she's not done running yet. Not by a long shot." Eli looked back toward the window where a faint light moved behind the curtain. No, Nietzsche wasn't done running, but this time she wasn't running alone. "You were never invisible, Nietzsche. You were just surrounded by people too blind to see." The afternoon light streamed low through the cabin window, warming the wide plank floor as Nietzsche stood shakily near the basin. One arm cradled Atsa close to her chest, the other gripping the edge of the counter to steady herself. Her body still ached from the delivery, but the rhythm of nursing, feeding, and rocking grounded her in a strange kind of strength. Eli watched her from the other side of the room as he chopped wood to stack by the hearth. Each swing of his axe echoed softly in the silence between them. She'd been quiet all morning, eyes far off like they were following a trail only she could see. The baby whimpered, and she bounced gently, whispering something in Apache. Eli didn't ask what it meant. He knew the sound of prayer when he heard it. Cora had returned the day before with fresh bandages and a bundle of dried willow bark, but Nietzsche had declined the woman's offer to stay longer. Eli hadn't pressed her. She seemed to need space, the kind of space only stillness could offer. "You need more wood in the lean-to," Nietzsche said suddenly, her voice soft but clear. Eli glanced up. "I'll cut some more after supper." She nodded, her gaze drifting to the half-sewn bundle of cloth she'd been working on a wrap for Atsa. "She'll outgrow that soon," Eli remarked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Kid's already got lungs like a mountain lion." Nietzsche cracked the faintest smile. Her brother was the same. Eli paused, setting the axe aside. "You never told me his name." She hesitated. "His name was Tahoma," she said, voice catching. "He had his father's eyes, always looking for the next thing to climb, even if it meant falling. He was 4. Silence pressed in again, heavier this time. "They told me I couldn't raise him alone," she said, staring out the window. "Said I wasn't stable, that I lived in shadows. I tried to reason, but they wouldn't hear it. One day I came back from work, and he was gone." Eli leaned against the post, arms crossed. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Nietzsche nodded, blinking fast. "I begged, I pleaded. I went to the sheriff, but they all sided with the family. His father's family, Christian, proper white. Said I was dangerous." "You weren't dangerous," Eli murmured. "No," she said, eyes sharp now. "I was just different." Atsa stirred and began to cry. Nietzsche sat down on the cot and began to nurse her, the rhythm of it slow and tired like a song winding down. "I don't want to be a burden," she said, not looking up. "You didn't ask for this." "I didn't," Eli agreed, walking slowly to the table and taking a seat across from her. "But I also didn't ask to be alone so long. Didn't ask to feel like I was walking through fog every day, not really seen. And yet that's what I had. Until you." She glanced up at that. You were never invisible, Nietzsche. You were just surrounded by people too blind to see. The room fell still again, but something shifted subtle like a thaw after a long winter. A knock startled them both. Eli rose, hand instinctively brushing the rifle by the door. He cracked it open to find Reverend Amos standing with a satchel slung over his shoulder and a serious look in his eyes. "You best let me in," the Reverend said, stepping past him. Nietzsche adjusted the blanket over Atsa's head, watching him warily. Amos bowed his head toward her. "Evening, Miss Nietzsche. I came to talk, not to preach." She gave a small nod, unsure. Amos set the satchel on the table and pulled out a folded letter. "This came to the chapel this morning, postmarked Elkhorn." Nietzsche's breath caught. Eli moved to her side. "It's from the family," Amos continued. "They're asking if she's been seen. Sheriff's stirring again, too. They're claiming you're unstable, that the child might be in danger." Nietzsche rose too quickly, and the pain twisted through her midsection. Eli caught her elbow. "No," she breathed. "They're lying. They're trying to start it all over again." "I know," Amos said. "That's why I came. You need a plan." Eli frowned. "What kind of plan? One that ensures if they come, they won't take her child. One that gives her standing protection. We need witnesses, documents, proof she's being cared for, not hiding." Nietzsche's voice was low and shaking. "They'll twist it. Say I ran, that I'm unfit." Amos nodded solemnly. "They might try. But if we act first file before they can press charges, it puts them on defense. You've got rights, Nietzsche, but you need to claim them before they're stripped again." Eli looked to her heart pounding. "Then we go to town. File what needs filing." Nietzsche blinked. "I can't show my face there. They all know me." "I'll walk in beside you," Eli said. "And if they try to shame you, they'll have to shame me too." The Reverend watched them both, something settling behind his eyes. "I'll draw up what I can, but we don't have long. They'll move fast." He stood tipping his hat. "When a woman's been wronged, it echoes," he said. "But so does courage." After he left, the silence returned, but it wasn't the same kind of silence. Nietzsche sat on the cot, her hand resting on Atsa's tiny back. "They won't stop," she whispered. "Then we won't stop either," Eli said. Outside, the wind had shifted, the kind of shift that spoke of something stirring in the distance. Not quite a storm, but not peace either. Eli stood watch on the porch that night, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the tree line. Inside, Nietzsche slept curled around her baby, but her dreams were not quiet. She dreamed of distant doors slamming shut, of her son calling out in the dark, of hands reaching but never touching. And through it all, she heard a voice. "You were never invisible, Nietzsche. You were just surrounded by people too blind to see." When she woke, the fire had burned low, but Eli was still there watching, not just the woods, watching her. As if to say, "You are seen now, and we will not let the dark steal from you again." It's not your past that defines you. It's what you choose to do with your strength now. The church bell rang just once in the quiet mountain morning, a lonely sound that startled a pair of crows from the fence post outside Eli's cabin. Nietzsche stood in the small kitchen, her baby cradled tightly in the wrap against her chest. She'd been up before dawn, boiling the last of the coffee and braiding her thick black hair into a tight rope that swung down her back. Her hands trembled as she laced her worn boots, not from fear, but from the rising tide of memory and fight that had haunted her all night. Eli came in from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. He paused when he saw her dressed, wrapped in her grandmother's hand-woven shawl. "You sure about this?" She looked up. They'll take her if I don't face them. His jaw flexed. I'll be right beside you. Naiche nodded, lips pressed in a firm line. She kissed Atsa's forehead and adjusted the sling. The baby murmured softly, then fell quiet again, warm against her. Outside, the wagon waited. Amos had driven up just after sunrise, the reins in his calloused hands and a steely look in his eye. "No one's stealing that child," he said simply. "Not while I've breath in me." The three of them rode into town as the wind stirred the trees above, and the sky sat heavy with the weight of something coming. Naiche's stomach twisted the closer they got. Every bend in the road felt like a narrowing gate. They passed the old grist mill, and then the mercantile came into view. Folks bustled outside, none of them glancing twice until the wagon came to a stop in front of the courthouse. Then the murmurs began. "That's her." The wild girl, with his baby Eli, helped Naiche down, his arm firm around her. Amos followed straight back, a stack of papers in hand. They walked up the steps together, not speaking, their boots echoing across the stone. Inside, the air was cooler, but no less hostile. Sheriff Grantham stood leaning against the far wall, thumbs tucked into his belt. His gray eyes narrowed when he saw her. "Well, well," he said. "Didn't expect you to walk in here on your own." Naiche didn't flinch. "We're here to file custody papers. Under the Child Protection Reform Act, I know what law you're quoting the sheriff cut in. Doesn't change what folks say. And what folks say holds weight in a town like this." Eli stepped forward. "Then maybe folks need to get their weight checked." The sheriff's gaze flicked to him. "You think standing beside her gives her standing?" "No," Eli said, calm but hard. "But the truth does. She's a good mother. And this town will answer for how it treated her the last time." Amos set the documents down on the desk, before the county clerk, who blinked behind his glasses and thumbed through the pages. "Everything's in order," Amos said. Witness statements, signed affidavit, background check, and a character reference from Reverend Morris out of Tucson. The sheriff scoffed. "Character reference from a preacher 3 towns over. He knew her when she worked the church gardens," Amos said, "and he wrote 3 pages about her kindness." The clerk cleared his throat. "Technically, she has the right to file this. The question is whether the court grants standing." "And when's that decided?" Eli asked. 3 days, the clerk said. "Judge Dunley's on circuit until Friday." Naiche gripped the sling tighter. And until then, the sheriff's lips curled. Until then, she better not disappear again. "I'm not the one who disappeared," she said, quiet but firm. "I was erased." Eli's hand found the small of her back. They left in silence, but the weight of that silence felt different. This time, Naiche had walked into the fire, and she was still standing. As they climbed into the wagon, a figure stepped out from behind the bank awning. It was Ruth, Eli's sister-in-law. Her eyes locked onto the baby in Naiche's arms, with a coolness that made the hair on Naiche's neck rise. "I see you've taken in another stray," Ruth said to Eli. "You always did have a weakness for broken things." Eli tensed. "Ruth, don't start." She stepped closer. "You're making a mistake, Eli. People are talking. They say you're planning to raise her child like your own. What do you think that says about you?" Naiche didn't wait for Eli's response. "It says he's better than the rest of you," she said, voice steady. "It says he sees people for who they are, not for what town gossip says they were." Ruth's eyes narrowed. "You always did think you were more than you are." Naiche stepped down from the wagon. "And maybe I am. But at least I don't hide behind my husband's name and a parlor full of people too afraid to live honest lives." Ruth's face colored, but she said nothing. She turned sharply and walked away. Eli exhaled slowly. "You didn't have to do that." Yes, Nietzsche said. I did. By the time they returned to the cabin, the wind had picked up. Nietzsche stood at the edge of the porch, watching the treetops sway like warning flags. In the distance, thunder rolled low and far off. She's going to come after us, she said softly. Eli stood beside her, his arm brushing hers. Then let her. This place has weathered storms before. Nietzsche turned to him, her expression tight but clear. I'm tired of hiding, she said, of letting other people tell me who I am. You don't have to anymore, he said. You're not alone now. She touched Atsa's head gently, then looked out across the woods again. Her voice was barely a whisper. It's not your past that defines you. It's what you choose to do with your strength now. The lantern above them flickered in the wind. Inside the fire was warm, but outside something was gathering, not just clouds, something long buried, and this time it would not pass by quietly. You don't scare me anymore, Ruth, and neither does the shadow of the woman I used to be. The sky cracked open at dawn, spilling light like truth across the valley. Cold wind clawed down from the ridge, rattling the bare branches near Eli's cabin. Nietzsche stood at the stove, ladling hot cornmeal into a tin bowl, her back straight, despite the ache in her shoulders. Atsa cooed softly nearby, tucked into a cradle Amos had carved from old oak and lined with rabbit fur. Nietzsche hadn't slept much. The court hearing was tomorrow. She'd spent the night running through every word she planned to say, every way Ruth might try to twist things. Her hands moved with muscle memory, stir, pour, wipe the edge of the bowl, but her heart was somewhere else, somewhere deeper. It wasn't just about Atsa anymore. It was about facing what had hunted her in silence all these years. Eli came in from chopping wood, snowflakes clinging to his shoulders. He leaned down, kissed her cheek, then scooped Atsa up into his arms. She's getting stronger, he said softly, smiling as the baby reached for his beard. So am I, Nietzsche whispered. Before they could finish breakfast, Amos knocked at the door. He looked grim, holding an envelope. This came down from town last night, he said, handing it over. Nietzsche broke the seal with a trembling thumb. Her eyes moved across the page, and then she passed it to Eli. She's filing for temporary custody, he muttered. Says you're an unfit mother due to transient lifestyle and history of trauma. Nietzsche looked out the window. She's not after the child. She's after me. Amos folded his arms. Then you give her nothing. Not your fear. Not your shame. She can't build a case out of ashes if there's no fire to stoke. Eli stood straighter. We fight this. All the way. Nietzsche said nothing, but inside her something shifted. A memory rose, her mother braiding her hair as a child, whispering stories of warrior women and how they stood still when arrows flew. She hadn't thought of her mother in years. That afternoon, they rode into town again, but this time Nietzsche wore a red ribbon braided into her hair. A quiet signal. A mark of the women in her bloodline who refused to break. The courtroom was small, paneled in pine, with a judge who looked older than the mountains themselves. Ruth sat already at one side wearing pearls and a smug expression, her lawyer flipping pages for show. The sheriff lingered near the back eyes, cool and distant. Nietzsche took her place across the room, Eli and Amos behind her, like twin pillars of granite. She could feel the weight of their belief pressing gently at her back. The judge looked over his glasses. This is a preliminary hearing. I'll remind everyone that character assassination will not be tolerated. We're here for facts, not feelings. Ruth's lawyer rose first. We have concerns, he began. This woman has no permanent employment, no listed residence, and a record of instability. Her child deserves better. The judge raised a brow. You mean the child who is healthy, clothed, fed, and asleep in a handmade cradle as we speak? The lawyer shifted. It's about environment, Your Honor. She's living in a cabin with a man who isn't the child's father. Eli stood. But who's acting like one? The judge nodded. We'll get to that. When it was Nietzsche's turn, she rose slowly, every breath deliberate. I don't have a lot, she began, but I have enough. Enough to keep my daughter safe. Enough to teach her what I never had, what it means to be held protected and loved without fear. I've made mistakes, but I survived them, and I'm not running anymore. The judge looked at her. You say you've changed. Prove it. Nietzsche reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a letter from the tribal council. They've offered to help with childcare support and give me work in the arts program if I choose to resettle. I have options. I'm not drifting. Ruth rose sharply. She abandoned her own family, ran like a coward. Now she wants to rewrite her story with a ribbon in her hair and a cradle full of lies. Nietzsche met her eyes. I ran because your brother locked me in a house and called it love. I ran because no one listened, not even you. But I'm not running now. I'm standing. And you don't scare me anymore, Ruth. And neither does the shadow of the woman I used to be. The silence that followed cracked something open in the room. Even the judge looked momentarily stunned. The sheriff shifted in the back, clearing his throat. I recall seeing her tending a neighbor's sick child last winter, he said. Brought firewood, didn't ask for a thing. That doesn't sound like someone unstable to me. Ruth turned on him. You're defending her. I'm stating what I saw, he replied, which is what this court asked for. The judge tapped his pen. I'll render a decision tomorrow. Until then, the child remains with the mother. Court is adjourned. Nietzsche's knees almost buckled when she stepped outside, not from fear, but release. Eli caught her elbow. You did it. No, she whispered. Not yet. But I will. They were halfway down the steps when Ruth's voice rang out behind them. You think you've won, this town doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. Nietzsche turned her expression unreadable. Then maybe it needs to learn how. They rode home in near silence, the sky above them bruised purple with coming snow. When they reached the cabin, Atza was stirring. Nietzsche took her up, breathing in the baby's scent, her arms firm and steady. Inside, Amos lit a lamp and set it by the window. Storm's coming, he said. Could be a rough one. Eli leaned against the doorframe. Then we'll ride it out. Like we always do. Nietzsche looked down at her daughter, whose tiny fingers curled against her shirt. I'm not afraid of storms, she said softly. I was born in one. Outside, wind slapped the shutters, but inside the fire was bright. And in Nietzsche's heart, for the first time in years, there was quiet. Not because the fight was over, but because she'd finally stopped fighting herself. Of course. Here's Chapter 7 based on the quote and continuity you established. I lost everything and still brought someone into this world. So I get to say what happens next. Not them. Me, the cold hadn't let up for days. A bitter wind rolled off the ridge, scouring the cabin walls with sleet and ghost sounds. Lorene stood in front of the fireplace, her arms folded over the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She hadn't slept much since the birth, not because the baby cried, but because the silence scared her more. Willow was too quiet. She kept checking the crib, an old apple crate lined with sheepskin, and leaning close to feel the faint flutter of the baby's breath. Every rise and fall of that tiny chest anchored her. The only thing in her life not trying to pull her apart was now less than 8 pounds, and wore a flannel cloth diaper held on with a wooden pin. Beside the stove, the stew was burning. "Dang it," Lorene muttered, rushing over and lifting the lid. A black crust clung to the bottom of the pot. She stirred quickly, but the scent of singed beans and rabbit fat had already claimed the room. She hadn't realized she was crying until her tears hissed into the steam. "I'm still standing," she whispered, "and I still get to decide." There was a knock, not on the door but on the wall beside the window. A hard, rhythmic tapping. Lorene moved fast, grabbing the rifle from the mantel. Her hands trembled, but she didn't lower it when the voice called through. "It's me, Jesse." Her legs nearly gave. She ran to the door, threw it open, and there he stood, soaked, red-cheeked breath clouding like smoke in the air. In one arm he held a sack of supplies. In the other he clutched a telegram envelope. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said, stepping inside. "You left before I could tell you. Something's changed." Lorene shut the door behind him, hands shaking, not from fear this time, but from something else. A long, unmet need, like steady ground. "What is it?" Jesse took off his hat, brushing the snow from the brim. "It's your father, or rather the man who calls himself that. He filed papers in Dry Creek. Says he's coming to collect his grandchild." Lorene laughed, sharp and bitter. "He wouldn't even look me in the eye the day he threw me out. Now he wants rights to my baby." Jesse looked pained. He's angry, embarrassed, but he's not the type to leave things be, and he knows the law here is soft toward bloodlines. "I am her bloodline," Lorene snapped. "I'm the one who carried her while sleeping on a cot in the church's back room. I'm the one who boiled towels and prayed she'd come out breathing. Not him. Not my brother. Not a soul in that house." Jesse held her gaze, his jaw working quietly. "I believe you. But belief ain't what holds up in court." She turned, grabbing the telegram from his hand. The words were sparse but cruel in their precision. "Lorene, prepare custody documentation. We intend to assume guardianship. Child deserves stable home." Silas, she read it 3 times before her vision blurred. "They want to take her. Not for love, for power, for reputation, like she's a trophy to be wrestled away. She's not even a person to them." Jesse stepped closer. "Then let's make sure they never get the chance." She turned sharply. "What do you mean I talked to someone in Silver Hollow? A woman named Mabel Rowe. She's a midwife but also knows how to file emergency guardianship paperwork under your name only. We ride there tomorrow before they can file with the judge." Lorene stared at him. "You'd ride with me to help me claim my own child. She's not just yours now. She's mine too. I saw her first breath. I washed your hands when you bled. I held the door shut while that storm rattled it like a devil." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she walked over to Willow, leaned into the crate, and lifted the baby against her chest. "Then let's go before the wind changes again." The road to Silver Hollow was frozen dirt and trouble. Jesse had hitched his mare to a small wagon, just enough room for Lorene and the child, wrapped in layers and set in a cushioned apple basket. They rode silently, the crunch of hooves and creaking wheels the only conversation between them. Every so often, Lorene would peek beneath the baby's covering, brushing a finger against her cheek. Still warm, still breathing, still here. "Will they challenge the filing?" she asked Jesse as they approached the town limits. "They can try. But Mabel's paperwork carries weight, and she's seen your bruises before. She knows what kind of man Silas is." Lorene swallowed the rising lump in her throat. "I hate that I'm scared of him. That fear means you know what he's capable of. But it doesn't mean he wins. Mabel's cottage smelled like lavender and old books. She was waiting at the door, a clipboard in hand, spectacles perched low on her nose. A sharp woman with eyes that missed nothing and a kindness that didn't ask for thanks. "Bring her in," she said. "We'll make this fast." Within the hour, the paperwork was done. Witness signatures gathered. Sworn statements added. It was official. Lorene May Cray was the sole guardian of Willow Ann by emergency decree under protection of threat. When she signed her name, her hand stopped trembling. She stepped outside into the bitter air, the wind stinging her cheeks, but she didn't flinch. Jesse stood at the hitching post, adjusting the reins. Lorene looked at him, really looked. "You could have let me figure this out alone," she said. "Why didn't you?" His eyes were soft but steady. "Because I lost a child once, and I know what that silence does to a person. I wasn't about to let you walk into that storm alone." She didn't know what to say, so she stepped forward, pressed her hand to his coat, and rested her forehead against his chest. "I ain't ever had someone stand beside me like this. You do now." As they rode back, the sun began to slip behind the ridge, casting long shadows over the snow. But Lorene didn't feel cold anymore. She kept one hand on Willow's basket and the other on the rifle Jesse had laid beside her. She'd protect her daughter. She'd face Silas. And if he wanted a war, she'd show him what a mother with nothing left to lose could do. Because now there was someone else coming who could make all the difference. And Lorene would be ready to stand between them and the storm. Of course. Here's Chapter 8 as requested, seamlessly continuing from the previous events and including the quote for this chapter. Quote, "You stood for me when no one else would, and now they want to come in like nothing happened." The snow had let up by morning, leaving behind a glassy hush on the ranch. Sunlight spilled over the distant ridge and caught the frost hanging from the barn eaves, turning the whole place into something close to holy. Mercy stepped outside the cabin with Jonah nestled in one arm, her shawl wrapped tight boots crunching on the iced path. A breath of cold air filled her lungs, but it wasn't the weather making her chest feel tight. It was the letters in her pocket. Willa had come down from the ridge just after sunrise, saddlebags swinging with mail from town. Among the bills and a flyer for a horse auction were two thick envelopes with familiar handwriting. One was from her father, the other from her sister Nadine. Inside, both letters dripped with sudden concern. "How are you holding up? You must come home. This isn't the life for you. We were shocked. We didn't mean it that way. Your boy deserves to know his family. Please, let's talk." Mercy didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She tucked the letters back in her coat and stood a long moment, her breath fogging up before her face. Behind her, the door creaked, and Boone stepped out with 2 mugs of coffee. "Willa said they finally came knocking, huh?" She nodded. 2 months of silence, then they remember I exist." Boone handed her a mug. His fingers brushed hers, steady and warm. "You don't owe 'em anything, but it's like they're pretending it never happened, that I didn't scream and beg at the front steps of the house I grew up in. Like I wasn't shoved into a snowbank with a baby coming." Boone's jaw clenched. "You stood for me when no one else would, and now they want to come in like nothing happened." Mercy swallowed hard. Exactly. The coffee warmed her hands, but not the ache that stirred beneath her collarbone. Boone looked out toward the field where the horses were gathering around a hay bale. "You get to choose now, Mercy. That's the difference. Not what they want. What you want." She nodded slowly, but it didn't make the weight go away. "I thought maybe I'd feel proud, vindicated, but I just feel tired. like I'm back at the edge of that door wondering if knocking again makes me a fool. Boone looked at her eyes steady. Maybe it just means you're human. That afternoon, she sat down in the old rocking chair near the fire, Jonah napping in his cradle. Her fingers moved over the paper, slowly rewriting the reply to her sister, more times than she cared to admit. She didn't want bitterness to bleed through, but she wasn't ready for forgiveness either. Not yet. She finally wrote Nadine. You ask how I'm holding up. I'm safe. My son is safe. I have a roof work that gives me purpose and people around me who didn't wait for an invitation to care. I don't know what you want to hear from me, but I've lived every day since that night remembering how easily you turned your back when I needed you the most. This isn't a goodbye letter, but it isn't a welcome back either. It's a line in the snow, and whether you cross it with truth or just more words, that's up to you. Mercy, she folded the letter and sealed it with a piece of yarn since they were out of wax. Boone offered to take it to town with the next supply run. That night, while Mercy shelled beans by lantern light, Willa sat across from her nursing a cup of sassafras tea. Letters from family, Willa said gently, can stir up storms worse than any wind outside. I've got a box full of 'em I never answered. Mercy looked up, grateful for her quiet wisdom. Did it ever stop hurting? Not exactly. But it changed shape. Became something I could carry without it digging into my ribs so much. Jonah stirred, and Mercy rose to comfort him. As she rocked him against her chest, she whispered, Mama's here, sweetheart. You got a home now. Outside, the wind shifted again, and with it came a knock on the door. Boone stood from the far chair, his body still but alert. Mercy glanced his way, unsure. Visitors were rare, especially after sundown. Willa took the cradle. Boone opened the door. A woman stood there in a travel coat, dust on her skirt and frost in her hair. Her eyes were red, her voice thin. I'm looking for Mercy, she said. Mercy stepped forward slowly, heart rising to her throat. Nadine, her sister, nodded, lip trembling. I came to see if the line in the snow was still there, or if you might let me cross it. Mercy stood frozen, hand tightening on Jonah's back. Boone's figure was solid behind her, Willa silent but present. The firelight danced across the walls as years of silence and sorrow swirled between the sisters like smoke. I didn't think you'd come, Mercy said softly. I almost didn't, Nadine admitted. But Daddy read your letter and said nothing. Just sat down and put his head in his hands. That was the first time I saw him look sorry in all my life, and I realized I couldn't be like him, not anymore. Mercy swallowed the taste of beans and ash and years of grief catching in her throat. I can't undo what happened, Nadine whispered. But if you let me in, I'll start walking back from it. Mercy stepped aside. Not all the way. Just enough for Nadine to decide if she really meant it. Boone gave a small nod. Willa motioned toward the chair by the fire. Nadine stepped in, glancing nervously around the room that smelled of cedar and hope. Jonah stirred and whimpered in Mercy's arms, eyes blinking open. He looks like Mama, Nadine said suddenly, voice breaking. Mercy's heart twisted. He's stronger than either of us were. The fire popped. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and slow this time, as if the sky was exhaling something it had held in for too long. Inside the cabin, Mercy and Nadine sat across from one another, quiet as the years between them. But in Mercy's mind, something shifted. This wasn't resolution. It was a reckoning. And if her sister had returned, others might follow. But not everyone would come in peace. I gave her everything I had, and they still called her nothing. The ranch was still and golden in the late afternoon light, wind tugging at the porch curtains. Like it too wanted to know what was coming next. Wade stood near the barn pitchfork, hanging loosely in his hand, watching the road from the corner of his eye. He hadn't said much all day. Not after the banker came by. Not after handing over that fat envelope with cash he'd been squirreling away. Not after he overheard the way the townsfolk still spoke her name with curled lips. She'd gone into town with Maggie and little Ellie Mae needing thread eggs, and maybe just a few minutes to feel like a normal woman, one who hadn't been thrown out in labor like trash. But Wade couldn't stop hearing the way the banker had looked at him when he said, "You're going through an awful lot of trouble for a woman who ain't even your blood." Wade had met his stare squarely and answered, "She's mine in every way that counts." But now, as dusk crept across the pasture, he found himself kneeling beside the creek hands in the icy water, scrubbing calluses as if he could wash the day off his skin. The last of the cottonwood leaves clung to the branches overhead. He whispered into the hush of the coming night, "Why's it never enough?" Clara returned just as the sun dipped behind the hills. She stepped out of Maggie's wagon carrying Ellie Mae on her hip, the baby cooing and slapping her chubby hands against her mama's chest. Clara's eyes found Wade instantly scanning him like she always did, worried he was pulling too much weight alone. She crossed to him fast. "You eat today?" she asked softly. "I ate," he answered, though it was mostly air and a crust of biscuit. "You all right?" wasn't the warmest welcome, she said. Mabel Atchison turned her head when she saw me coming, pretended she was looking at fabric. Wade set his jaw. "Don't mean nothing. You ain't what they say." She sighed. "I know. It's just—" He waited. She rarely finished sentences like that unless she needed to cry, and crying didn't come easy to Clara. "I don't want Ellie to grow up hearing the same names they called me. Not when I'm trying to build something better. I want her to be proud of her mama." Wade stepped forward and brushed a wind-blown curl from her cheek. "She already is. She don't even got the words for it yet, but I see it in her eyes." Clara blinked quickly and leaned her forehead against his chest, the weight of the day folding into him. "I got the ledger from the banker," he murmured. "We're down to a thread, but if I sell that bay mare and 2 of the yearlings, we'll cover the winter." Clara pulled back. "No. You love that mare. I love you more." She opened her mouth, but he hushed her with a look. "I didn't keep you and Ellie to let you freeze." The next morning before dawn, Wade saddled up and rode to the far pasture. Snow was coming. He could smell it in the way the sagebrush held the cold. The horses stirred near the fence line, steam puffing from their nostrils. He was looping the lead rope around the mare's halter when he heard Clara's voice. "She's the only one that runs to you." He turned to find her standing in her coat and shawl, Ellie bundled against her chest. "She's loyal," he said. "So am I," Clara whispered. "Let's not sell the things that love us just to keep things that don't." Wade blinked at her, unsure what she meant. "I've been thinking," she said. "Let them talk. Let them sneer. I'm not going to lose what we have trying to make people like us." Back at the house, Maggie was brewing chicory and fussing over a lopsided stack of mail that had been tossed onto the counter. "Something's off about this envelope," she muttered, tapping it. "No return address, no stamp, but it was in the box this morning." Clara opened it and read in silence. Wade watched her shoulders go stiff. She passed the note to him. "I hear you're parading around like you belong here. We know the truth. Your kind don't get fresh starts." There was no signature. Maggie stared. Someone hand-delivered that coward. Clara sank into a chair. "I thought they'd forget, but they're waitin', watchin', just to see me fall." Wade folded the note and tossed it into the stove without a word. The flame ate it hungrily. "No one touches my family," he said. She looked up at him. "But they are. They're already poisoning the air." Later that week, as snow flurried around the edges of the barn, Wade and Clara sat in the loft, watching Ellie giggle from her nest of quilts. "You ever think of leaving this place?" Clara asked suddenly. "Starting clean somewhere else?" Wade shook his head. "This is the land my pa carved from rock and root. I bled into this dirt. I won't run just because they don't understand what grace looks like." Clara smiled faintly. "You think I'm Grace?" He reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're the mercy I didn't earn." The next morning, someone had trampled the small herb garden outside the kitchen, just crushed it, muddy boots and boot tracks leading in a taunting zigzag. A cruel gesture, but a loud one. Wade stared at the mess, and then up at the gray hills. "All right," he muttered. "You want to push, we'll push back." By afternoon, he rode into town and walked straight into the general store. Folks fell silent when they saw him. "I'm looking for the man who delivered a letter to my wife's box without a stamp," he said. Nobody moved. Nobody admitted a thing. "Then let me be clear," he said, voice even. "You don't have to like us. You don't have to understand us. But you will respect the home I've built and the woman who built it with me. She nearly died bringing a child into this world, and not a soul lifted a hand. But I did. And I'll do it again. You can whisper, sneer, stomp our herbs, but you can't undo what we've made out there." A long silence followed. Then from the back, old Mr. Jebb, who ran the post office, stood and muttered, "He's right." Wade turned to go, dust trailing off his boots. When he got home, Clara was sitting with Maggie, sewing patches into Ellie's little dress. The air felt warmer despite the frost. "I said my piece," he told her. "Did they hear it?" Clara asked. "They will," he said. "They will." But just as his hand brushed hers, a shadow passed by the window. A figure stood just beyond the porch, one Wade recognized from the past. A man who hadn't come round in years, not since Clara's name first stirred trouble. And that figure called out, "We need to talk. It's about Clara and the baby." Wade stepped forward. The flame in the hearth flickered. Clara rose to her feet slowly. Ellie whimpered in her cradle. "She has my eyes," the man said quietly, "and her mother's fear." Wade didn't move. His hand hovered near the rifle propped just inside the door, not out of panic, but out of the ancient instinct that rises in a man when someone threatens the stillness he's bled for. Clara stood behind him, holding Ellie close to her chest, her knuckles white around the baby blanket. The stranger on the porch was lean hat in his hands, hair damp from melted snow. His coat looked expensive. His boots had never seen manure. Clara whispered, "His name's Franklin." The man's eyes flicked toward her at the sound of his name, then dropped almost as if ashamed. "I didn't come to make trouble," Franklin said. "I just came to see her. Just once." Wade didn't answer. The door stayed shut between them. Franklin shifted, glancing at the child in Clara's arms. "I sent the letter, and I left the herbs trampled. I wanted you to leave Clara. I thought it would be cleaner than this. You almost got her killed," Wade said, voice low and sharp as wire. "I didn't know she was so far along," Franklin said. "They told me she was making it up, trying to trap me." Clara laughed once, bitter. "You knew I was with child when you left me in that house with your mother and sister. They didn't even let me sleep indoors." Franklin swallowed hard. I know now, and I'm sorry. I came to offer." No, Wade cut in. Franklin blinked. "You don't even know what I'm offering." "You're offering too late," Wade said. "She doesn't need your name or your money or whatever hollow apology you rode in with. That little girl is ours." Franklin stared down at his hands. I thought I was doing the right thing. My family said Wade opened the door fully and stepped out onto the porch, letting the cold bite the space between them. You had your chance to do right by her, he said. You chose the coward's way. And now you think one ride through snow and a speech out here is going to fix what you shattered. I didn't come to take her away, Franklin said. I just wanted to see her, that's all. I thought I'd feel something. Clara came forward, voice calm but cold. And did you? Franklin looked up, pain flickering through his features. She has my eyes. And my strength, Clara said, chin high. So don't confuse biology with belonging. Franklin looked like he might speak again, but Wade stepped between them. You've done what you came to do, he said. Now go. Franklin lingered a moment, looking past Wade toward the warm light flickering behind the window, toward the soft coos of the baby he would never raise, never tuck in at night. Then he turned, stepped off the porch, and walked back to the trail. He didn't look back. Wade closed the door and bolted it behind him. Clara stood very still, rocking Ellie in slow, instinctive sways. He looked different, she murmured. You did too, Maggie said from the hearth. You looked like someone who finally knew who she was. Clara sat down slowly and kissed Ellie's forehead. He'll come back. Maybe, Wade said, pulling a chair beside her. But next time he does, he won't find a woman begging for scraps of decency. He'll find a family. They didn't speak of Franklin for 3 days. But on the 4th, Maggie returned from town with word. He's been talking, she said, pulling off her gloves. To anyone who'll listen. He says he came all this way only to be shut out. He's making you look like the villain Wade. Wade didn't flinch. Doesn't matter. It does, Maggie said. Because he's not just talking to folks over coffee, he's talking to lawyers. Clara stiffened. What kind of lawyers? Maggie sat down. The kind that ask about rights, about paternity, about whether you took her away from a proper home. Clara's laugh cracked through the room like a dry twig. Proper, they left me in labor on a porch. Maggie reached for her hand. I know, honey, but Franklin's folks have money, and money buys stories that folks believe. Wade stood up and paced to the window. Snowflakes danced beyond the glass like ashes in the wind. He doesn't care about Ellie, Clara whispered. He just doesn't want to lose control. Wade turned to her. Then we remind him what real strength looks like. That night, Wade wrote out everything he remembered. Dates, witnesses, neighbors who saw the bruises, the midwife who nearly lost Clara to fever. Clara gave her testimony too, hands shaking, as she put to paper the truth of her last days in Franklin's world. Then they walked it into town and laid it before the judge. I don't want money, Clara said. I don't want vengeance. I just want to be left alone. The judge read the pages slowly, then looked up. I know the family Franklin comes from, he said. They're used to winning. But I'll tell you this, you write like someone who's telling the truth. And that baby looks plenty safe where she is. Still, the days after that were tight. Franklin's people stirred up gossip. A few neighbors stopped calling. A few folks turned their backs at the store. But others started coming around quietly, offering eggs, bringing cut firewood, saying things like, "We saw what you did. We think you're brave." Clara hung blankets in the cold and whispered thanks to each one. Ellie's first tooth came through in that chill, sharp and sudden like a sign. And one evening, Wade sat on the porch, holding her against his chest, watching the horizon burn gold with the last of the day. You know, he said to the baby folks like him think they can stamp a name on something and call it theirs. But it's the ones who stay up through the fever, who patch boots, who haul in wood when no one sees, that's who really belongs. Ellie babbled and drooled on his shirt. Inside, Clara hummed softly while she stirred beans on the stove. Maggie patched a quilt by lantern light. There was no audience for their work, no reward waiting at the end. But the home was warm, and no letter, no man, no whisper in the dark could change the truth they'd built here. Wade looked down at Ellie, whose eyes blinked up at him, calm as dawn. "You're not a secret or a shame," he whispered. "You're the proof that love does what cowards never can. It stays. A man may own land cattle, even his own name, but love that can't be bought. It's proven." The frost had hardened into ice across the windows, a filmy veil that dimmed the morning sun to a cold, gray light. Inside, the warmth from the stove was holding, but barely. Wade tossed another log into the firebox and tapped the door shut, glancing toward the kitchen, where Clara was bent over a stack of clean linens, folding them with the quiet rhythm of someone who had too much on her mind. Ellie babbled in her cradle nearby, kicking one-legged cheeks flushed from the heat. She was teething again, restless and clingy, and Clara hadn't slept in more than a few hours since Franklin's departure. Not because she feared he'd return, but because, as she'd whispered to Wade late one night, the war's not over just because the drum goes silent. They both knew he hadn't come to claim Ellie out of love. Franklin had come to reclaim something he believed was owed: pride, control. He'd spoken of legacy, but never of lullabies or long nights or the quiet act of staying. And still, the threat of his return lingered like smoke that clings to the rafters long after the fire's gone out. Maggie came in from the barn that morning, her coat dusted with snow, her gloves stiff. "You've got a visitor," she said, unsnapping her collar. "Rides a black horse, clean boots again. Lawyer type." Clara's eyes met Wade's. "Stay inside," he said, but Clara straightened and handed Ellie to Maggie. "No, I'm not hiding again." They stepped outside together, boots crunching the icy path. The man stood near the edge of the fence line, hands tucked into a wool coat hat brim dripping meltwater. "You're Mr. Wade Keller?" he asked, gaze flicking to Clara. "I am," Wade said. "My name's David Hunt. I'm representing the Taylor family." His voice was dry as paper. "My client has submitted a formal petition for paternity and custodial visitation. He is willing to provide a monthly sum for childcare and education in exchange for structured access to the child to begin immediately." Clara stepped forward. "No." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mrs. Taylor, it's not Mrs. anything," she said. "And this is not a business negotiation. This is a child." Hunt exhaled through his nose. "I suggest you obtain counsel. We're filing with the court this week. If you contest, it will move to a hearing. There may be consequences for refusal to cooperate." "She is not a cow to be bartered," Wade said. "And we're not signing anything that puts her in the hands of a man who left her mother in labor on a porch." Clara's voice rose. "Let him file. Let him try. We have the midwife's account sworn and notarized. We have a witness who saw your client abandon us. We have proof Franklin knew I was pregnant and did nothing. You tell him the only thing he'll win from this is shame." The lawyer tilted his head slightly. "You're very emotional. Courts prefer logic." "I prefer truth," Clara said. "You can't buy truth with letters and lawyers." The man paused, then opened his briefcase, pulled out a sealed envelope, and held it out. "He wrote this for her, for when she's old enough to read." Wade didn't move. Clara took it. The envelope was thick, the handwriting neat. She didn't open it, just stared at it as if it might catch flame in her hands. The lawyer turned to go. "You'll hear from us by end of week." They didn't speak until he'd vanished down the snowy road. Clara tucked the letter inside her coat without a word. Wade touched her arm gently. "You all right?" "No," she said. "But I will be." Back inside, Maggie met them at the door, her eyes asking questions. Wade shook his head. Lawyer, paper threats. Maggie blew out a breath. We'll be ready. But the next few days thickened like soup left on the stove too long. Neighbors brought gossip. The Taylor name stirred stories of new money, fast hands, and courtroom wins. Clara avoided town altogether, instead spending her time in the garden digging in the frozen soil like it owed her something. Wade kept working on the roof, adding boards, reinforcing beams, as if the house might need to withstand more than weather. At night, Ellie cried more. The tooth coming in cut sharp. Clara paced, soothed her, sang the old lullabies she remembered from her mother's songs that hadn't been sung in years. Wade often stood in the hallway listening, watching the silhouette of two shadows moving as one. She deserves peace, Clara murmured one night. She'll get it, Wade said. 2 mornings later, the snow fell heavy, thick and soft as wool. And with it came 3 riders, not Franklin, deputies, couriers. A knock at the door, and the paper was served. Court date's been set, one said. You'll want to get your side in order. Wade signed nothing. Clara took the summons and folded it neatly. Once they were gone, she set it on the table and said, He's trying to make this look like responsibility. He's trying to erase what he did, Wade said. Rewrite the ending. Maggie lifted her head from the quilt she'd been sewing. Then you write it back stronger. You don't let someone who vanished become the hero in the last act. Clara sat still a long moment. Then she rose, went to the cupboard, and pulled out the envelope. He wrote this for her, but she's not old enough to read it. Wade nodded. You could burn it. I could, she said. Or I could read it and know exactly what kind of story he's still trying to tell. She broke the seal. The letter was smooth, not too long, written in Franklin's crisp, careful style. He spoke of regret, of wishing things had gone differently, of a girl born into confusion, of promises he had broken and ones he still hoped to keep. He ended with, I don't ask you to understand, only to know that you were loved in a silent way. Clara folded it slowly. He calls that love sounds more like shame, Wade said. She laid the letter on the hearth just close enough to feel the heat. He thinks love is silent, conditional, hidden behind money and lawyers and someone else's pen. But Ellie will know better. She'll know love that shows up at 3 a.m. with a bottle. Love that splits wood, that fixes the cradle that stays. Wade came to her side. A man may own land cattle, even his own name, but love that can't be bought. It's proven. They stood quiet a moment, just the crackle of fire and the sleepy coo of Ellie from the other room. Then Clara said, Let him come to court. Let him speak. And when he does, Wade asked. We'll speak louder, Clara said. With truth, with memory, with every scar and every sunrise we stayed for. And so they began gathering everything, not just for a judge, but for the record of a life lived in love, not in shadow. A life not owed, but earned. One filled with broken nights, mended hearts, and the kind of strength that needs no spotlight to stand tall. There's a kind of justice that doesn't wear a robe or hold a gavel. It walks into court with truth on its heels and love in its hands. The town courthouse had never looked more cold. Not from the weather, though snow sat heavy on the eaves, and the steps were slick with slush, but from the way the building loomed stiff and gray, like it was trying to swallow something alive. Wade held the door open for Clara, who cradled Ellie against her shoulder, wrapped in a pale blue blanket Maggie had made the week before. The child slept through the chill pink cheeks, warm from the coat lining, one little fist tucked under her chin. Maggie came next, face stern beneath her scarf, eyes sharp as flint. We walk in, we hold our heads high, she said. He's banking on fear, let's not give him a drop. Clara nodded but said nothing. Inside the hall, echoed with the sound of polished shoes and murmurs. Franklin Taylor stood near the bench, dressed in a three-piece suit that looked borrowed from a world he still didn't fit in. His lawyer, David Hunt, adjusted his tie and glanced back as they entered. Franklin's gaze flicked to Clara, then to Ellie. He shifted slightly, his jaw moving as if he meant to speak but didn't. Clara didn't slow. She moved to the right side of the courtroom and sat Wade beside her, Maggie just behind. The judge entered, a tall, pale man with white hair combed back tight and glasses perched low. His voice, though, was strong. This hearing is regarding visitation and potential custody acknowledgement filed by Mr. Franklin Taylor, the judge began. We'll proceed with sworn testimony and documentation. Franklin's lawyer led first. Your Honor, my client has acknowledged paternity and wishes to establish legal and emotional presence in the child's life. He has offered financial support and visitation with the goal of building a relationship over time. The judge leaned forward. Was this presence offered at birth? David Hunt paused. There were complications, emotional distress. However, I see the judge interrupted. Clara stood when called. Her voice, though soft, filled the courtroom with the force of a winter wind breaking branches. He left me on a doorstep while I was in labor. He didn't ask if we lived or died. Now he wants legal rights. Miss Harper, the judge said, do you have supporting documentation? I do, she replied. Wade handed the clerk a small stack of papers, the midwife's sworn statement, witnesses from the clinic. A copy of Franklin's text message dated the night Clara went into labor, refusing to speak with her. Clara's own written affidavit of what happened that night, signed and notarized. The judge took his time, read each sheet slowly. Franklin watched the floor. Miss Harper, the judge said, you mentioned abandonment. Yet you did not file a formal complaint until now. Why wait? I didn't want revenge, Clara said. I wanted peace for my daughter. But when a man who ran from her starts showing up with lawyers and paper promises, I have to protect her. Not from the man he was, but from the illusion he's selling now. Franklin stood then. I've changed. The judge raised a brow. You may speak when addressed, but Clara turned to face him. Then prove it, not with words. Prove it by leaving us in peace. You didn't want to be a father when she was crying at midnight or coughing with fever. You didn't want her when I had to beg for milk. And now that you've found your pride again, you want to hang it on a child's name. Franklin's mouth opened, closed. I was scared. So was I, Clara said, but I stayed. The room was quiet. Only the rustle of a turning page from the judge's desk broke the stillness. David Hunt cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client is not contesting past mistakes. He is offering present stability. Maggie stood. The judge nodded. You are Maggie Benton, neighbor, friend, witness to the first breath that baby took. You have something to add. I watched Clara raise that child without a dime or a hand to help for months. I watched Wade carry wood into that house before dawn and walk out with a baby on his hip after dark. If Franklin wants to prove he can be a father, now let him start by stepping aside and learning what love actually looks like. The judge looked at Wade. You're not listed in this suit. No, sir, Wade said. I'm not here to claim anything. I'm just here to stay. I made that decision the night I found them in the snow. There was silence again. This one heavier. The kind of silence that says everything that needed saying has been said. The judge leaned back. Court will recess for 1 hour while I review. They stepped outside for air. The snow was falling again, slower now. like a soft curtain coming down between acts. Clara sat on the bench under the courthouse awning, Ellie in her arms, awake now, and chewing on her fist. Franklin came out a few minutes later and walked over. "I didn't mean for it to come to this," he said. "I just thought maybe I could be better. Try again." Clara looked up at him. "Then be better somewhere else." He looked down at the child, who stared back without recognition. "I did love you once," he said quietly. Clara nodded. "That's not what this is about anymore." When the gavel fell later that afternoon, the courtroom was hushed. After reviewing all documentation and testimony, the court denies the petitioner's request for visitation and custodial rights, the judge said. The child's welfare is clearly being provided for, with consistent emotional and physical support from the current guardian. No evidence was presented to suggest involvement from the petitioner would benefit the child's well-being. This court recognizes the right of the mother to maintain sole custody. Case closed. Clara didn't cry. She stood, held Ellie close, and walked out into the light that was beginning to shift from gray to gold. Maggie exhaled. "Well, that's that." But Wade looked down the courthouse steps where Franklin lingered, watching them go. "No," he murmured. "That's not that. But it's the beginning of something better." Clara looked back once, just once, then forward again. "There's a kind of justice that doesn't wear a robe or hold a gavel," she said almost to herself. "It walks into court with truth on its heels and love in its hands." Wade took her hand in his. "And sometimes it leaves with a baby in its arms and a future finally clear." The educational lesson learned from this story is that true love and responsibility are proven through quiet, consistent action, not grand speeches or sudden changes of heart. When someone shows up day after day, especially when no one's watching, that's when trust is built. The past can knock on our door with polished shoes and new intentions, but wisdom teaches us to protect what we've fought for. Especially in matters of family, the heart must be guarded by discernment, not guilt. And sometimes walking away from what once was is the bravest act of love we can offer to those in our care.